Hello, BookTube. I've got a big, sloppy mess of a Monday Reads for you. A whole bunch of books sprawled out over all sorts of different categories. And when I was looking at all of them, I decided, you know what? To hell with it. We're going to do an unscripted episode in one take. So the first one I want to start off with is not new. It's a reread that I'm doing, and I'm having a ball doing it. I am rereading Shakespeare's only trilogy. His trilogy plays about Henry VI, a much troubled king who is a perfect feeding ground for drama. I'm amazed that he hasn't had a great historical novel written about him. And in fact, if he has, and I don't know about it, let me know. Maybe the closest thing that anyone dares to come is these three plays by Shakespeare. It could be. But the reason that he's such a great breeding ground for drama is because he himself was weak. He led a strong state, had a very strong claim to it, but he had what we now recognize as severe mental problems. And that Shakespeare's day was only barely beginning to recognize as severe mental problems. And that allowed for strong personalities all around him on all sides to start claiming whatever they could grab. And that is fertile ground for a dramatist. And the reason I have been absolutely loving rereading these three plays, absolutely loving it. But the reason that I've been doing that is because of this, because I read this for a second time. This is Lauren Johnson's big, fat forthcoming. I think this is early May. This may be right upon us now. Yeah, May 7th. This is right upon us. Her big biography of Henry VI. He has been comparatively underserved for biographers, not because there isn't a wealth of information about him, but because there isn't that lightning bolt in the center, right? I mean, think about his father, Henry V. You won't lack for biographies of him at all because he makes good reading. And Lauren Johnson knows that. Who is she? You know, I'm going to have to figure that out for... oh, what a great cover photo. What a great author photo that is. But I'm going to have to figure that out for... she's a historian with a first-class degree from Oxford University. Oh, right. And we saw this when we got, I think, the advanced copy of this book. She's also the author of So Great a Prince, which is about the youth and accession of Henry VIII. And the stuff that she does in that book, constantly keeping an eye on the fact that she cannot rely on momentum to carry the reader along, but instead making sure that her book has that brisk, shuffling feet of energetic storytelling underneath it. The same thing that she did in that book, she does 10 times over in this book. This is actually a terrifically enjoyable, entertaining royal biography of a British king that even fans of British monarchy probably know very little about, aside from what they learned in Shakespeare, which is, of course, exceedingly inaccurate. It's a great drama. But I've been rereading that trilogy because I just read this for the second time and am impressed by it. So that's part of my Monday Reads for you. Another part of Monday Reads is also a reread of the billionth time. This is the billionth time. Not quite as many times as I've reread the Shakespeare Henry VI plays, but closing in on it. And that's The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is a trade paperback that I found, I think, at the Brattle. And it originally had a cover of a bunch of sleepy elves waking up in the moonlight, which is about as boring as staring at a rock, except for the sing-song kind of gauzy spirituality that some people go to Tolkien for, where nothing is near, everything is unto. To say the least, I don't go to Tolkien for that. So the cover was intensely boring. And then I thought, when I saw it, I thought, well, don't get it. If it's got a boring cover, you're not going to want to use it. And then I thought, well, no, wait a minute. You're going to have to reinforce the trade paperback anyway, or it'll fall apart. I'm very hard on my books. It'll fall apart when you read it. And if you're going to reinforce it anyway, which involves, those who have been around for 1,000 years, you'll remember I used to make repair videos where it involves reinforcing the book with clear plastic packing tape. And if I'm going to do that anyway, then why not just find a picture for the cover that I like better and put it on there instead, covering the book's original cover. And I did. I found a great dramatic picture of a dragon fighting armored men, which happens a number of times in the Silmarillion. And the reason that I'm not rereading the whole thing, I tell myself, I tell myself I'm not doing that. Instead, I am reading the chunk that covers the original treachery of Sauron to the Númenóreans and to the High Elves, the forging of the Rings of Power, including the One Ring, and then the long contest between Sauron and the elves and the good men of Middle-earth. In other words, the Second Age. The Second Age of Tolkien's Middle-earth. And the reason that I'm boning up on that, the reason that I'm reading again, although, well, I tell myself, I started out with this being the reason, but I just fall under the spell of this book. I love it so much that I fall under the spell of it regardless of what my original intentions were. But my original intention was to bone up on this because the Second Age of Middle-earth is going to be the setting for the new Amazon ongoing series that they're going to have on their streaming service, into which they are pouring God's own amount of money, enough money to start a country. They are effectively starting a country. The country is Middle-earth. And they teasingly published a map that is the map of the time period that they're using that shows Númenor. So those of you familiar with Tolkien's lore you can glance at that map and pretty much tell roughly the beginning of the story and roughly the end of the story. And the end of the story, if Amazon is wise, they will not have this be open-ended. It will be 5 seasons, 6 seasons, 7 seasons, but it will always have a planned ending. And if it does, then the natural planned ending is the very beginning of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings movies. Those of you who have never read Tolkien will still have seen those movies. And you will remember that those movies start with the last great alliance of men and elves that are actually powerful enough and numerous enough to storm Barad-dûr, to storm the Black Gates of Mordor. A feat utterly unthinkable to the powers of the West in a later age, in later ages. But at the time, the strength of men and elves was great enough to do that, to challenge Sauron. And when he comes forth, they lay siege to Sauron's stronghold for 7 years, and they have the winning. Many people die on both sides, but they have the winning hand. They are the stronger. And when Sauron comes forth to fight, he faces their 2 greatest captains, and they both die, but they also beat Sauron. And when he's defeated, they cut the One Ring from his finger and take it. And his body essentially dies, and his spirit, he's an otherworldly being, so his spirit vanishes off into the hinterlands it needs a long time to regrow. The regrowing of that spirit and the return of Sauron to Middle-earth, a Middle-earth that is completely unprepared, that is completely lessened from the age that actually defeated him, is the basic story of the Lord of the Rings. But the end point of the Second Age is the defeat of Sauron and the stealing of the One Ring. The One Ring, enters briefly into the possession of a human owner and then is lost to history. If that is your end point, the defeat of Sauron, then you know the story. The story will basically be the story of Sauron at his height in the Second Age. And I'm curious, just incredibly curious to know how Amazon is going to do this. I don't see a way. I know that they don't have the legal rights to a great deal of what's in the Silmarillion. But I think they do have a lot of rights to the unfinished tales, and I'm not sure how much of it matters or how much of it they can get around. But I know that there've got to be some board meetings somewhere where people are saying, well, can we trust to float this thing on the strength of Tolkien fans just in general? Or do we want to tap into movie fans who maybe aren't Tolkien fans? You have to assume, since we live in famously what was famously referred to as a post-literate age, you have to assume that most people who are fans of Lord of the Rings are fans of the movies and have not read the books. You just have to assume that. It's a terrible thing to assume, but nevertheless, you do. And if that's true, and you are the moneyed suits at Amazon pitching this thing and coming up with how you're going to do it, your first question is going to be, well, what can we do to link the movies, the reality of the movies, with this series? We can't have it be just completely separate. Of course, there are ways, but they would be mind-bogglingly expensive. They involve hiring the same actors, right? one of the things we learn in the Lord of the Rings movies, or in the Lord of the Rings the book, if you read the book first, one of the things we learned, if we didn't know it already, at the great chapter of the Council of Elrond, is that some of the characters that are in this storyline are thousands of years old. Elrond, for instance, the master of Rivendell, is thousands of years old. Galadriel is even older than he is. Thousands and thousands of years old. Galadriel remembers a world before the sun and the moon. She remembers two different ages ago. She's one of the Noldor, one of the only ones left in Middle-earth. And plenty of other elves too, and also the Ents and Tom Bombadil. These people, these beings are incredibly old. And Elrond and Galadriel are in this story. You could, I guess, see what those actors are doing and maybe get them on board. I don't know how that's going to work. But I only needed that tiny little nudge to start rereading in here, because I'm curious to know. I'm looking at it now as an Amazon showrunner, and I'm trying to think, okay, if I see all of this material, and I know from the vociferous complaints about Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy, how it went off script, so to speak, how it just wildly departed from the books, and fans vociferously complained about it, and they have not been taken to the heart of the fan-going cinematic universe in anything like the way that the original trilogy was, because the original trilogy, for a Hollywood trilogy, is fairly accurate. It's certainly reverential to the subject matter. The original Lord of the Rings trilogy is quoted throughout Peter Jackson's trilogy in every minute. Not true with his Hobbit trilogy at all. I still maintain that what he should have done was a beautiful movie, just a 2.5-hour movie of The Hobbit. Never mind the Disney acts, never mind the CGI, never mind the stretched out, tortured trilogy with new characters and idiotic new concepts. No, just 2.5 hours. Peter Jackson has shown that he can do it. His King Kong movie is incredible. Just incredible. From start to finish. And it's one movie. He didn't make a trilogy out of it. I think he should have done one movie of The Hobbit. That would have been just incredible. But there was a dramatic difference between fan reactions to the Lord of the Rings trilogy and the Hobbit trilogy. The fans did not like the Hobbit trilogy much at all, and I don't blame them. I didn't like it either. It was a whole lot of hot air and blather. If I'm a Hollywood exec and I have all the money in the world, an Amazon exec, and I am looking at this material, then I would have to hope that somebody in the room is saying, well, what we ought to do for sure is stay faithful to the material. We can innovate here and there, especially in places. There are many places where Tolkien does not give details. Even the story that I just mentioned, which is one of the most famous stories to any Lord of the Rings fan, where Gil-galad and Elendil defeat Sauron and cut the ring from his finger. People remember that scene in the Lord of the Rings movie. At the very beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, we see that. But we see one version. We see a defeated character swing desperately with the broken shard of his sword and cut the ring from Sauron's hand as Sauron is reaching down. But that's not what the text says. The text says they defeated Sauron and cut the ring from his defeated hand. The text doesn't specify how they defeated him at all. So, and Tolkien does that a lot. He will leave a door open for all kinds of interpretation, and that is all throughout the Second Age narrations in the Silmarillion. So you could be very faithful to the source material, but I'm hoping that somebody in the room made that case, because that's the way to make it good. That's the way to make it really, really good. But think of the obstacles involved here. You don't have Aragorn. You don't have. You better not have Legolas. I mean, he's probably alive for some of this, but he was just a princeling in the woodland realm. He was not anybody important. He was not traveling the world. He says so himself. You'd better not have him, but you could have Elrond. You could have Galadriel. You might work in some Ents, although I wouldn't do it, because it's made pretty clear in The Return of the King that Elrond and Galadriel have never seen Ents before. They've only heard of them. They've heard myths of them, stories about the Ents and their wandering Ent wives, not having palled around with them and met them, much less met specifically Treebeard. And probably worst of all, there are no wizards in the Second Age. There's no one anything like that. There are no exposition givers. Nothing like that. So what are you going to do? I can't wait to find out. And that's all the prompting that I needed to reread this. I am rereading it now. I'm studying it. But then the next one is a thin little thing, but it also prompted a reread. I tell you, I don't need much. I love rereading books that I love. I am, as you know, if you watch this channel, I am passionate and also duty bound. Two different aspects. I am passionately in love with new releases and staying current with them, reading them all, learning about them, keeping my head just above the water of this incredible deluge of new releases that the new world is confronted with all the time. I love doing that, love it. And I'm also duty bound to do it because I have an audience and I have a lot of people who ask me about new releases, whether they're in the reviewing business or not, and I feel like I should have opinions on these things. If there are 4 books on Charles Lindbergh in 1 year, quite a few people, both on BookTube and not, are going to ask me which of the one is the one they should pay attention to. So it's passion and duty, and I love it. I absolutely love it. But nevertheless, it doesn't take much to get me to reread older books, because for years and years of my life, especially the years and years when I was traveling, I never read a new book, never went into a bookstore. I never stopped reading, ever, not for a minute, but I never went into a bookstore, never spent money on a book. No way. I had a group, whether I was traveling and I had my little Foot Locker, or whether I was at home in some apartment, wherever it was, whether it was Iowa or Venice or Hermosa Beach or wherever. When I was settled, I had a library of books, a small library of books, probably about as many as you see in this little room. And I never got new ones, virtually never. I would go to the Brattle bookstore or the Either Or bookstore in Hermosa Beach or something like that and pick up an interesting volume here and there. I obviously had a weakness for library book sales, but usually I was content just to revisit old friends. And I'm doing that again. That is the segue to this. This is a new book from Europa Editions that comes out, again, I think in May. Yes, later in May. This is by Antoine Copagnon, and it is A Summer with Montaigne. This is a translation from the French by Tina Cover. The author is a professor of French literature in Paris. He also has a gig at Columbia. And it's a thin little thing. It's just him over the course of it's a book about him over the course of the summer reading the great essays of Montaigne and reflecting on them and interweaving stories of his own. And I'm a sucker for this sort of thing. I absolutely love it because I love the essays of Montaigne. I absolutely love these. I study this book periodically. Periodically, nothing will satisfy like spending a couple of hours on an afternoon with Montaigne. Whether I agree with the essay in question or whether I don't, this is one of the immortal books of Western literature. And to see, so this book, I'm a little way into it. I dipped into it a couple of weeks ago, and now today I'm gonna read it. And I know already, in fact, it's already started that it's going to send me back to Montaigne, to reading huge swaths of the essays, far more than this one little book. I don't know though. I don't know how much of that I will do. Again, I will try to control myself. All of these rereads, I'll try to control myself. I'll try not to read all of the Silmarillion. I'll try not to move on from Henry VI back to Henry V when it comes to Shakespeare. But anyway, those are some of the rereads. Now I want to show you some of the newer books. And the first one I think we've seen on this channel before. This comes out soon. Yeah, this is out already. This came out. It comes out this week. But it's probably in bookstores already. I doubt it has a strict on sale date. It's by Ron Cohen, who is a really talented, his biography says that he's a really talented, award-winning science writer. In other words, writing about science for a popular audience that might not have specialized training. And having read this book, I can attest that those awards were well given, because he is just about as good as you can get. This is his book, Gravity's Century, From Einstein's Eclipse to Images of Black Holes. And the pub sheet in the book gives you a little tingle when you read it, because the pub sheet is saying that there's hope that sometime soon we will have the first photographic image of a black hole. And those of you who watch social media or maybe read the science news know that in between when that pub sheet was written and now, that actually happened. But this is one of, it's a thin thing. It's the tiniest one of the ones that we're getting. But we've seen on this channel, there's a small spate of books that take as their starting point the solar eclipse of 1919, in which one Quaker scientist and a whole bunch of other people in the world realized that if they were properly situated to observe it, it would be a great proving ground for one aspect of Einstein's theory of special relativity, which is that space-time bends the path of light. That space-time is this thing, this ball sitting in a net hammock, and everything is the surface of the net hammock, even light, everything, even time. Einstein made his theory and worked out his theory to the point where he could say, if this theory is right, then if it were ever possible to observe, you would see that bending. You would see that effect. You would have to, or my theory is wrong. And that 1919 eclipse was the way that people knew that theory, at least that part of it, was right. And this author takes that eclipse as his starting point and then moves forward with a very, very good narrative about how our understanding of Einstein's concept of space-time and special relativity has progressed, how it's grown in the last 100 years, and who the people are who've done it, and what breakthroughs they've made that, unlike E equals MC squared, are not known to the general public. The progress that's been made here, the breakthroughs that have been made here, and certainly not known to me. You, if you're a science nerd, maybe, but I am not, much as I aspire to be. And this book is fantastic. And one of the strong points about it is that it is the confident way that it explains the concepts, not just the people and the experiments, but the concepts, especially quantum entanglement. The whole idea of the interaction, what quantum mechanics means for Einsteinian theory, for Einsteinian physics. The whole intersection between those two things is wonderfully done in here, wonderfully. I'm going to reread this. It's a tiny little thing. It won't take me long. I'm going to reread it and take some more notes, but I loved it. I strongly recommend it. Quantum entanglement has been fascinating me for years. That this because it is flatly on the surface, it says there has to be something basically wrong or incomplete about our understanding of how things work, just in general how things work, not just Einsteinian physics, but just anything. That if you can change the orientation of a particle and have a quantum entangled corresponding particle elsewhere instantaneously match that change of orientation without any means or time for the information to travel between the two particles, where it happens instantaneously, where it seems like somehow those two particles remain entangled, hence the name, even when they are theoretically a universe away from each other. That shouldn't be true. That shouldn't be true. According to Einsteinian theory, according to Einsteinian physics, nothing travels faster than the speed of light. No information travels faster than the speed of light. And that change in orientation is a packet of information. And yet it appears to be communicated instantly. And that this author does not explain that to me. I don't think he could, because I don't think he understands it. But boy, oh boy, what a book. What a book. What a book for just making you think and doing it all in a totally accessible and non-condescending way. Going to be a treat to reread it. Then this next one is something we've heard of on this channel just yesterday. Yesterday I was praising Marilyn Stasio, who does the crime column for the New York Times Book Review. And I was also praising, by extension, the mighty Irma Heldman, who has been doing a similar crime column since, I don't know, the Victorian era. Irma is a standard, just a foundational pillar of Open Letters. First Open Letters Monthly, and now Open Letters Review. Both are iterations of a critical journal that I have been a part of since its founding. And Irma has pretty much been a part of it from its founding too, but she goes way, way back in the mystery world. And I was praising yesterday Marilyn Stasio's way of doing that kind of column, which is also Irma's way, where the critical assessment of the books in question never happens in the column itself. Instead, the critical assessment is what causes them to be the books in the column in the first place. It happens offstage beforehand, and it does happen. I have never had the pleasure of meeting Marilyn Stasio, but I have worked with Irma for a long time, and back in the beginning days of Open Letters Monthly, when she had been out of the book column game for a while and so was getting very few review copies, I would send her review copies, and the she's had a handful of critics over the years, and those critics have said, oh, well, she's totally indiscriminate. She's just hoovering up whatever and singing the praises of everything. That is not true. To put it mildly, that is not true. There were many authors where Irma said, don't send me him, hon. Okay, don't send me him. Don't send me her. Her books make me sick. No, the editorial decisions take place before the column. The books that are joyously written about in the column, whether it's Marilyn Stasio or Irma Heldman or whoever, there are probably other people who make columns like that. All of those decisions take place before. The reason why you're even hearing about these books is because those decisions have taken place. And what you get in the column is just a description of and celebration of the book. It's the given is that I wouldn't be talking about these things if they didn't merit your attention. Whereas other columns have the critical elements actually in them, where the writer will say, this book is worth your attention, and now I will tell you why. Now I will explain why. In this old style mystery column, and it used to happen with science fiction and even fiction, believe it or not, plenty of fiction. It'd be heterodox to do it now. But once upon a time, it was the standard approach to things like this, especially roundup columns, which are tough to do. Once upon a time, the standard approach was, I am not going to explain to you in this column critically why this is worth your attention. Instead, I'm going to assume that you're assuming that it is worth your attention, or I wouldn't be talking about it. Instead, I'm just going to tell you about it. And I thought, in honor of that, in honor of my appreciation of that old style way of doing things, I would pick one of the books that Marilyn Stasio wrote about in her column. And it just so happened that I had one. So this is going to be coming right up on my list here. This is by Chris Pavone, or Pavoni, and it is The Parish Diversion. And it's a thriller that comes with the back has no description, just tons of blurbs from the greatest thriller writers alive today. And this is, let's see here. American expat Kate Moore drops her kids at the international school, makes her shopping rounds, and meets her husband Dexter at their regular cafe. A leisurely start to a normal day. Across the Seine, tech CEO Hunter Forsyth stands on his balcony, perplexed that his police escort just departed and frustrated that his cell service has cut out. So, I haven't read the book, but just a word to the wise to all of you who are also tech-savvy CEOs. If your police protection detail cuts out at the same time that your cell phone reception does, you're in big trouble. You should start making for the door. Hunter has important calls to make, not all of them technically legal. On the nearby Rue de Rivoli, remember shopping, wandering down the Rue de Rivoli, all the bookshops. Oh my, probably all gone by now. Wow. Mahmoud Khalid climbs out of an electrician's van and elbows his way into the crowded courtyard of the world's largest museum in the epicenter of Western civilization. He sets down his metal briefcase and removes his windbreaker. That's when people start to scream. So, it's just classic high-octane thriller. And we will see, usually, people who write the kind of crime column that Marilyn Stasio does or that Irma Heldman does, usually they don't steer me wrong. I've lost count of how many books I found and made sure to read because of Irma over the years. And I've never done that with one that didn't end up being worth it. And I don't see any reason why Marilyn Stasio would be any different. I think she and Irma are probably cut from the same cloth. And so we're going to see. This is in her column, so I'm assuming it's good. I'm going to give it a try. And then the next one is historical fiction. And it's by an author who wrote a book that a lot of you will probably have read, maybe for a book club, if you're unlucky, or just in bookstores. This is Melanie Benjamin. And this new book is Mistress of the Ritz. Very nice, understated cover. Look at that. It's absolutely made by the red in her coat. But this is the author who wrote The Aviator's Wife, about Anne Morrow Lindbergh. And this one sounds fascinating, just fascinating. I'm going to read you just a bit here. Nothing bad can happen at the Ritz. Inside its gilded walls, every woman looks beautiful. Every man appears witty. Favorite guests like Ernest Hemingway, F. Scott Fitzgerald, Coco Chanel, and the Duke and Duchess of Windsor walk through its famous doors to be welcomed and pampered by Blanche Ozello and her husband Claude, the hotel's director. The Ozellos are the mistress and master of the Ritz, allowing the glamour and glitz to take their minds off their troubled marriage and off the secret that they keep from their guests and each other. But there's a problem, you could see it coming. And the problem in this case is not just the troubled marriage. The Aviator's Wife was very much in the vein of I Married a Bastard historical fiction. There's a ton of I Married a Bastard historical fiction. Not quite sure what the allure is, or if I am, then I'm wondering if the husbands of all the women in these book clubs know what the allure is. I'd be worried if I were them. But the problem here, the main twist in the plot is not the negatives in their marriage, but instead something much worse. In June of 1940, the German army sweeps into Paris, setting up headquarters in the Ritz. Suddenly, the likes of Hermann Göring are moving into suites once occupied by royalty. Blanche and Claude must navigate a terrifying new reality, one that entails even more secrets and lies, one that may destroy the tempestuous marriage between this beautiful, reckless American and her very proper Frenchman. For in order to survive and strike a blow against the Nazi guests, Blanche and Claude must spin a web of deceit that ensnares everyone and everything they cherish. In other words, the master and mistress of the Ritz start aiding the resistance. And that sounds fascinating to me, just fascinating. I remember really liking The Aviator's Wife, even though I thought parts of it were groaningly obvious. I have to assume, that was not the author's first walk in the park, I have to assume that authors of books like this have an eye pitched to book clubs. It's a very lucrative submarket of the reading world. But I'd like to think that they have a higher opinion of the discrimination of those book clubs than to just pander like that. There were parts of The Aviator's Wife that struck me as just pandering in a way that I know the author is capable of better, and I can't wait. There are also large parts of it that I loved, so I can't wait to read this. And then the last one, nonfiction. This comes out, I think, in May. This is from the folks at the MIT Press. Yes, this comes out today. This is by Lee McIntyre, and it's called The Scientific Attitude: Defending Science from Denial, Fraud, and Pseudoscience. You have see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, and microscope. Very key. Very key. So the pub sheet obviously is not going to have anything good to tell us, but you knew that when you married me. Let's see here. From climate change deniers to anti-vaxxers to flat earthers, science denial and pseudoscience are on the rise. In a new book, philosopher of science Lee McIntyre describes a new way to reassert the importance of science and change minds. In this book, the author argues that in order to refute these harmful ideas, we must be able to explain what's so special about science. We need to clearly lay out why the scientist who's testing and retesting, changing their hypothesis and testing again, should be trusted over someone sharing dubious anecdotes and proof on social media. The book is at once an accessible philosophical examination of science's power and a rallying cry for those concerned about the grave harm being caused by pseudoscience and science denial. So I know this book is going to infuriate me. Not for flat earthers, obviously, but anti-vaxxers? The United States is teetering right on the brink now. You look at the numbers for new measles cases in America, virtually wiped out completely before anti-vaxxing took hold and became a fad in the rich enclaves of Los Angeles, and also disseminated through rabid, click-hungry YouTube channels that don't believe what they're saying. They just want the clicks. They just want the traffic. Before that, measles were almost gone from the United States. Now, you look at the numbers. If you look at the numbers in the latest reports, like you check, if you go to Google, for instance, and do measles 2019, you'll see a whole bunch of studies, read them all, factor them all together, figure out what they're saying. You will see that there's a drastic increase in measles in the United States. Right now, you'll look at the numbers and think, okay, that's not that many, and there are localized pockets. And the thing about something like measles is that it reaches its tipping point very quickly. And once it reaches its tipping point, it's everywhere. And the only reason it's getting there is because people think that vaccines are dangerous for their kids. And that is a case where science denial or pseudoscience or whatever is literally dangerous to all of us. Because what do you do if you're a parent? What do you do? I often wonder this myself. Every time I go up to the little farmhouse in Vermont, I'm brimming with questions about what on earth you do if you're a parent in 2019. What do you do in 2019 if you think there's a chance that, let's say, 15 parents in your kid's grade school don't believe in vaccinating their children against measles? On the one hand, you might think, okay, well, if they're crazy, then if they're willing to put their kids' health at risk, fine. I guess it's a free country. The lunatics can do whatever they want. But the key is they're putting your kid's health at risk when they do that. Would you send your kid to a school if you knew that? Or would you keep them home? And what kind of laws would you support? I think it's fascinating. And I'm hoping that it's elaborately covered in this book. Certainly it's a subject that fascinates me, so I will gobble it right up. And that is it. That was an all over the map Monday Reads. Terribly sorry about that book too. So we have The Scientific Attitude about pseudoscience and science denial, a new book on that subject. Then we have Mistress of the Ritz. The husband and wife who run the Ritz have a whole new set of decisions to make when the Nazis take over, as you would expect. Then The Paris Diversion, just a high-octane thriller. I'm hoping that it'll be a lot of fun. Then a book that I really recommend. I'm going to read it again. I don't imagine I'm going to find anything wrong with it. I think really what the point is that I will learn more from it. And that's this, Gravity Century, which starts out with that eclipse that we've heard about on this channel of 1919, and then moves on to the present day, right to the lip of the present day. The discoveries, the developments have moved on. We actually now have those pictures of a black hole. But the story is fascinating. Then we have A Summer with Montaigne, which is a thin little thing, but it's causing me to reread Montaigne. It's probably going to cause me to reread a lot of Montaigne, far longer stretch than the book itself. Then we have The Silmarillion, but I swear, just the second age. That's all. Just the second age. I'm not going to do anything else. It's by far the biggest part of the book. And I want to read it with an eye towards figuring out what's going to be done. Who are the main characters going to be? What stories are we going to see? Then Shakespeare's trilogy on Henry VI. Just reading it over lovingly. I absolutely love it. So I'm reading it over and over again. And that is because I just finished reading The Shadow King, and I really recommend it. It's a terrific royal biography. So there you go. A long, hideously bloated, and badly disorganized Monday Reads. I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.